Hello, friends, brothers and sisters on the path of return. This is Keith Joseph from the Institute for Hermetic Studies. Today we are talking about, once again, the introduction to magic from Julius Evola and the group. We're on section 3. So this is an interesting, the beginning is interesting. There's a very short essay on the subtle body, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then there's a translation that was initially done from the Sanskrit by Arthur Avalon. Sir John Woodruff is his name. Arthur Avalon is his pen name. He was in correspondence with Evola. He's an interesting figure, one of the very first to translate tantric texts. And this text that appears in the Introduction to Magic, Knowledge as Liberation, apparently has been translated nowhere else. So the translators of the book point out that they're translating it from Sanskrit to English to Italian back into English. So they do not want to endorse the veracity of the translation so much as to say that it reflects what the readers of were looking at. But anyway, it's a very interesting text. And as a kind of commentary upon that, I wanted to mention this book by Frithjof Schoun, The Transcendental Unity of Religions. I had just read this book, and it's really interesting, and it kind of I thought it would be interesting to talk about in this context. So the first essay, The Subtle Body, one by Leo, continues the discussion on the manipulation of awareness or consciousness in the heart, and also just the idea that what we're trying to do is get out of the identification with our senses. And so that's part of moving awareness to the heart, right? The reason that we experience our sense of self in the head is because so much sensory input is coming there. And so we're separating ourselves from our sensory input in this way. We're not identifying with it. And this is the key to a lot of these early texts is, what is it that we're identifying with? And there's two parts to that. There's the emptiness part where we're disidentifying, we're recognizing the things that we cannot be: our body, our thoughts, our perceptions, our feelings, our name, etc. These things we cannot be. They're not eternal things. They're not lasting things. And if we identify with them, then surely we will die, because they are going to die. This body is going to decay. And if we are so wholly identified with that, then we can't help but die with it. So that's the one aspect, is the emptiness, and that's the realization of, almost the mystical realization of awareness, undifferentiated, undefined, formless, etc., non-dual awareness. But then there's the being in the world, the embodiment, the fullness of and living, and that's where we develop our identity and what we are identifying with. And that's the assumption of the God form, the 3 ways essay that was in the first part of this book. On the emptiness aspect is this essay, Knowledge as Liberation. It's a really interesting essay. It's scripture, so it's a dialogue. Shiva is teaching in the essay, or in the text, and it's very interesting. It's not that easy to sum up, but the idea is that our true nature is this divine, formless awareness, and that's who we truly are, and that's what ultimately we want to identify with. And everything else, whether it's practices or ritual or scripture, is only steps to that awareness, and they're not necessary once that understanding or that identification is achieved. Once we are disidentified with all the things that we aren't truly. I wanted to bring up this book because one of the things that Schuon does in this book is he makes this argument, and it looks like a New Age book, but it's not. He's a traditionalist also, in a different vein than Evola, in the sense that he really endorses exoteric religion. He would argue, or does argue, that exoteric religions, there's a transcendent unity to them, but they are distinct culturally as traditions within their own context. They're each particular revelations of the transcendent truth. And he's a very orthodox theologian, in that he doesn't say anything that would contradict the orthodox teachings of each of these different religions. He focuses mainly on the Abrahamic religions, but also some of the Vedic understanding as well. The reason I thought that this was interesting in this context is, one thing he says is that there is no East or West at the metaphysical level, and by metaphysics there he means the esoteric, the point from which you can understand the unity of all these different traditions, in that they're all pointing to the same transcendent tradition, primordial tradition, and in effect that non-dual awareness. The part that's what I thought was interesting, is that there's a metaphysical truth that cannot be East or West, right? If it were, it wouldn't be. There's only one metaphysic, is the argument that he makes here, and that's how you get to transcendental unity of religions. This is a really interesting book. The analysis of each of the traditions is I thought really illuminating and very respectful to those traditions. Just to give you one kind of taste of the kind of analysis that he puts forward, he draws an analogy between the virginity of Mary and the illiteracy of Muhammad. In Christianity, Christ is the revelation, and therefore Mary's virginity is crucial because she's giving birth to the incarnation of the Word. So she must be pure. Muhammad's illiteracy is analogous because he has to be free of human learning, human understanding, in order to be a pure vessel from which the revelation, which in Islam is a book, the Quran, can come forth. So really, it's an interesting read. I recommend it. One last thing, one of in the previous video, a comment came up. John Wayne had commented on the limitation of the translation, especially even in the title, where what this book is really about is this kind of realization. I think it's even the original is a science of the self. That comes up in just his point is very valid. The last volume is translated as realizations of the absolute individual. And the reason I think this is important to note here, one, we see where the path is going, but I was reading, I don't even think it's worth mentioning the author. I wasn't super impressed by it, but he was making a distinction between right hand and left hand, and arguing that right hand was kind of this mystical non-dual awareness where you dissolve the ego and you no longer have an individual existence. And then the left-hand path was this quest for immortality. I think that Evola here, and I think even at the Institute, what we're trying to do is kind of transcend that distinction. We want to have a clear, we want to purify our identity and have that ability to rest in non-dual awareness, to abide in non-dual awareness, but then also to manifest ourselves as an incarnation of that, and with an individual personality, with memory, with experience, so that we're a unique expression. One of the ways that I've been thinking about it is, Alexander studied and emulated Achilles. Caesar studied and tried to emulate Alexander, used him as a model, and Napoleon studied Caesar. Each of these men had their own unique expressions and unique greatness, but they're all emulating, if you like, a God form. And so we can do something similar. And I think that's what this practice is about ultimately. So if that's interesting to you, please leave a comment, like it, share it. Let me know what you think. If you have questions or comments or disagreements, I would really like to engage with you in the comments. And great news, the Institute has posted a Evola class. It's, I think, next Saturday, the 24th, if I'm not mistaken. I will put a link to that. John White is leading that. Jeff at Applekocker Radio did a great interview with him, really interesting with John White. I'll put a link to that in the description, and also to the course on Teachable, and to the Institute and our blog as well. And I will see you in the next video.